Here I am. Hello, everybody. Let me know if you can hear me okay. I feel like I have some sort of reverb going on. Hang on. All right. Apparently, I don't. So I hope everybody is doing really, really well. Yay. We are back for the spooky season eve. So our season actually starts tonight. So don't forget, while we wait for everybody to come on in, get the notifications, all the good stuff from all our platforms. The best way to support your streamers is to share. It's absolutely free. Just share out to some of your friends that you think might enjoy this. I am Mother Della Mort with the Horror Gallery. And if you are new tonight, not only let us know that you're here and where you're from. We always like to have new victims here in the crypt. But for you guys that may be just tuning in or catch this on the replay, um, I my forte is dark history, um, things along those lines, macabre, the macabre side of history, and I really, really kind of I tend to go Edwardian and further back, and so tonight's going to be a little bit different. It's not quite the traditional Mother Delamort type topic, but it's sort of kind of like a juxtaposition because this does still kind of fall under what I do. But the serial killer thing we don't really touch on a whole lot, but that's where we're going tonight. We're going to go down that rabbit hole. So um, yeah, so we're going to give everybody a little bit more time to file in here and get comfortable, and then we will get started. Let me go ahead and I'm going to pop over to the comments real quick so we can see who's in here. Oh, it looks like we've got a bunch of people. So we have Shelby, and I'm not going to put these up right now, but we have Shelby and we have Roots Bleed Red. Hello, Roots Bleed Red. Let's see. Shelby says, "Hey, beautiful odd mother." Well, hello, Shelby. We are so glad you're here. We'll pop that one up. There we go. And then Roots Bleed Red says no reverb. Well, good. It's been so long. I feel like I've been gone for so long that this is, I don't know, it feels all new again. I feel like I sound funny or something. And then let's see, we've got Hexus in the house. Hexus says, "Hello, all my good people." I tell you, we were so excited to get back. We have just been chomping at the bit. Kisa, she says, "Hello, odd mother." Hello, Kisa. Yes, we are back. We are back. We've got a brand new sponsor. We're super excited about that. Good friend, has always been a good friend of the PBDC Collective Inc. Always, but decided to go a little extra mile this year and become one of our sponsors. So we're super excited about that, and we'll have some information on that coming up in our midway. So that'll be fun. And then we have Lawnmower Man. Hi, Odd Mother. Hello. And he's saying hello to Roots Bleed Red. And then, yes, the millisecond delay on the monocaster throws me off too. And it's just a teeny tiny delay. It just kind of sounds like it's just a wee bit of an echo. But I'm telling you guys, if any of you guys are out there that are looking to get into streaming or already streaming and doing shows, I can't say enough about these monocasters. They are cheap as far as the cost in the scheme of soundboards. And they're mobile. So if you go to cons, things like that, they are a great piece of equipment to take with you. It comes with the microphone, the soundboard, and all your little doodads that go along with it, and really brings kind of a professional level to your podcasting. So I would definitely recommend that. And if you'll go on our website and hit that Mayonocaster link, you can get a percentage off through us. And then Prometheus is in the house. Gaming. All right. So we'll go ahead and we'll get started. So tonight, like I said, it's a little bit different than what we normally do. This kind of bleeds over into Roots Bleed Red, just a teeny tiny bit. And I did get most of my, well, I got some of my information from murderpedia.org as well as wikipedia.org. And that was really mostly just to remember dates and places and things like that. The main body of the information that I got was from a very good book. It was called All That Is Wicked, A Gilded Age Story of Murder and the Race to Decode the Criminal Mind. And the really interesting thing about this particular gentleman is that he actually predates the infamous H.H. Holmes. And it's really odd because I kind of refer to him as kind of like the serial killer that time forgot. Oh, there's Shirley. She wants to make an appearance. Right on down, Shirley. Um, but he's kind of like the serial killer that time forgot. So I found this really interesting when I stumbled across this. Um, so that's where I got my information. And that book is by a author by the name of Kate Dawson. So I'm going to quote, "There's a fine line between genius and insanity. I have erased this line." Oscar Levant. So on the second floor of Uris Hall, an academic building located on Cornell University's campus, lives a typical glass display case. Inside lies not prestigious awards or ordinary memorabilia, but something much more extraordinary. Can you guess? It holds 8 jars of real preserved human brains. Now, perhaps more fascinating than the brains themselves is the history behind them. The collection has been around since the turn of the 19th century and was the brainchild of Cornell faculty member Bert Green Wilder. Now, Wilder started the project to understand more about the capabilities of human knowledge. So, this is kind of where, if you wanted to go really, really far back with like profilers and mine hunters and things like this is where they really kind of got started as far as trying to understand the whole nature versus nurture and things like that, which is going to progress as they go down, through time and become more accurate, I should say. Now, perhaps an example of the most notorious specimen in the collection is a scholar and philanthropist, as well as a convicted serial killer by the name of Edward Rulloff. Now, Edward H. Rulloff was a noted philosophist, basically kind of a linguist, and a criminal. Rulloff is also notable for his brain, which in 1970 is the second largest brain on record and can be seen on display at the psychological department at Cornell University even today. And now he was referred to as the genius killer. Now, John Edward Howard Rulloff was born in 1819 and died in 1871. Also known by other names as Rule-Off with one L, Rulosofson, and Rule-Off-Son, as well as several other aliases. He was a Canadian-born American doctor, lawyer, schoolmaster, photographer, inventor, carpet designer, phenologist, and philosophy. He was into philosophy, as well as a linguist, in addition to a career as a criminal and a serial killer. Now, Rulloff was born near St. John, New Brunswick, to Danish immigrant parents. And a fun fact, his brother was the well-known photographer, William Roloffson. Now, William Herman Roloffson was, of course, a Canadian-American photographer. Now, he is known, along with his partner, H.W. Bradley, they were considered one of the leading photographers in the city of San Francisco, California during that time. Now, by the time Edward Rulloff was 20 years old, he had already worked in a law firm and had already served 2 years in prison for embezzlement. In 1942, he moved to Dryden in upstate New York, where he worked as a school teacher and studied botanical medicine with a Dr. Henry W. Bull. The following year, Ruloff impulsively married Bull's 17-year-old cousin by the name of Harriet Schultz. With no former courtship and against the wishes of Schultz's family, who considered him beneath their station, but Ruloff, they did wind up getting married, but Ruloff was a very jealous man and was immediately suspicious that his wife preferred other men, specifically another man who she had been acquainted with. On occasion, Ruloff was seen to beat Harriet, but she did not complain. Now, eventually, the couple moved to Lansing, New York, and in 1945, they had a daughter, Priscilla. But that did not help the situation. Ruloff, again, proved to be a very hard man to get along with. Now, in May, Will's wife, which would have been, would have been Harriet's brother, Will's wife, Amelia, and his infant daughter grew very ill, and she had just recently had the baby. Now, since he knew that Ruloff had some rudimentary knowledge of medicines and herbs, he asked for assistance. And now, to understand the relationship between Ruloff and Will, which was her brother, it was very contentious. The family did not like Ruloff at all, which was very unusual during that time because usually the wife was always encouraged to stay with the husband. But in this case, they disliked this man so much that they were perfectly okay with her moving back home. And it took a lot for her brother Will to even ask him to do this. But this kind of tells you how sick his infant daughter and wife were. Now, since he knew about herbs and medicine, Will did eventually ask him for assistance. Now, Ruloff attended to them both. They remained ill, however, and in June, the baby finally expired, followed soon after by her mother. Now, since Ruloff had spoken darkly of his grudge against Will, some people, as well as some historians, truly believe that he poisoned both of them in order just to basically retaliate against his dislike for Will. And if you read up on Ruloff, he is credited pretty much for their murders. So you know, he just, I don't know. He was a psychopath, is really what he was. If it didn't affect him, you know, directly, he really had very, very little empathy for anybody else, including very close family members. And if you'll give me just a minute, I'm going to get to the comments because it looks like we have a bunch of them in the chats. All right, so they did wind up passing away, and like I said, he was credited, unfortunately, to poisoning both of them. Now, of course, Will was heartbroken over his loss, but did not suspect Ruloff or the demise of his family had anything to do or any connection with Ruloff. Then basically the common maladies that struck many women and infants during and after giving birth. These two just hadn't been strong enough in his mind for the brutal winter in upper New York State. Now, that same month, however, only about 2 weeks after the grim double funeral, Ruloff's own wife and daughter disappeared. The last sighting of Harriet was on June 23rd when she borrowed soap from a neighbor. She had said nothing at that time about going away, as well as a young girl who was in the home with Harriet and Priscilla later that same afternoon stated that she too reported that there had been no hint of an impending journey. However, there was activity in the Ruloff home that fateful night. Apparently, Ruloff and Harriet had an argument over their future plans. Like I said, she was getting about to her wit's end with him because he was just crazy. He was crazy and he was mean. Ruloff knew that her parents didn't care for him. Her family did not care for him. So he was constantly trying to get her to move away. And she would constantly tell him, I'm not moving any further than I am at the moment, because she was, I think about 30 miles. They were about 30 miles from her family, which back then that was a long way. Um, but she wasn't willing to go any further than that because she knew he was a violent man. Now he was trying to basically argue with her that they move further away from his wife's family and pressured her to move to Ohio, where he planned to work as a lawyer or a college professor. Now, when Harriet refused and threatened to return to her family with their daughters, or with her daughter, um, and with Ruloff wanting to go west to seek a better job opportunity, and Harriet's desire to remain closer to her family, he basically lost his temper. Now, Ruloff would give his own version later on, and it would be given to a reporter by the name of Ham Freeman, which would come years later after this particular incident. And basically, this version was that they argued while she was holding the baby, and in the heat of the moment, Ruloff grabbed a pedestal that he used to crush medicine and struck her in the head. And if anybody has ever used a mortar and pestle, they're usually made out of some sort of stone or rock, and they're extremely heavy. He apparently cracked her skull, and she fell to the floor. He tried to revive her, and he claimed, and he dressed the wound, but she remained senseless and expired sometime during the night. Now, Ruloff would never tell anyone what had happened to his daughter, aside from the fact that he had mixed a narcotic concoction to just stop her from crying. Now, both of them simply, as far as anybody else was concerned, vanished. And he gave out various stories about why and where they had gone, and about how, basically Harriet left on her own. That was one of his excuses that he told. Now, later on down the line, there were some people that came forward that said that once he had knocked her out. Now, again, it can't be proven, and I'm only going with the most documented story, or his version of the story. But some people came in and at that time and later said that he had, I guess, bragged to some people that he had, once he had knocked her out, he actually removed one of the floorboards, slit her wrist, and basically put her hand there to where it wouldn't get on the floorboards. It would go under the house. So he was not a stupid man. He was not a stupid man. All right, so let's see what's going on in the comments real quick, and then we'll get on with it. Oh my goodness, we've got so many people in here. All right, let's see. Oh, we have Pogo in the house. Pogo says, "Good day, everyone. Shout out from Mr. and Mrs. Pogo and the Australian clown community." Well, welcome, welcome. I'm so glad you're here, Pogo. Let's see. All right. And we have Nadine in the house. Nadine saying hello to everybody, and that I have missed you guys. I know we have missed everybody. We were so happy to come back. And we've got a full schedule coming up. We have Chit Chat with a Ka, and it's going to be on just a special night that night. So this coming up Monday, she's going to be on, and then Thursday will be the return of You Can't Sit With Us, and then Friday will be the return of Roots Lead Red. So we've got a whole couple of days lined up for everybody. And then Prometheus says, Amelia, yes. The daughter's name was, or I'm sorry, his wife's name was Amelia, yes. Aw. And so Pogo says, PBDC is my favorite live feed. I'm so glad. We try to keep it interesting. We try to cover a lot of things that you guys haven't heard about ad nauseum, or at least if it's a really popular topic, we try to bring extra information to the table. So thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, let's see. We have Crystal Johnson in the house, sending hearts. Hey, Crystal, how are you? So glad you're here. And Jeremy says, what's up? All right, let's see. Aw, and Keisha says, "I love PBDC." Well, we love you guys. I tell you, if it wasn't for you guys, none of this would be there would be no reason for us doing it. But we really, really love hanging out with you guys and entertaining you guys and just having a good old time. So thank you so much. All right. So let's get back to where we were at. All right. Now, through all this, and you see, if you know a lot about serial killers or even just kind of a general sense of serial killers that tend to have certain psychopath or psychopathy, um, they're very narcissistic and they do like to play the victim a lot of times. So, of course, it wasn't surprising that Ruloff also claimed that when all this happened, he contemplated killing himself. And then, of course, apparently he thought better of it, which is it's not it's not surprising at all. Now, the next day, calm as a cucumber, he borrowed a horse and a wagon from his neighbors, the Andersons, and in the pretense of returning a wooden chest to his uncle. Besides the chest, the Andersons saw Ruloff placing a half-full sack or pillowcase in the wagon and then driving towards the area of Cayuga Lake. Now, in the direction, which was in the opposite direction of the his declared destination. So he just, I don't think it wasn't that he couldn't keep his story straight. I think he just didn't care. He just really he saw himself as far as intelligence above everybody else. So and again, a lot of this we're not going to cover a lot of it. If you really really want to know about this particular topic, I really do suggest the book, and I'll give you the name of that book before we close tonight. So now, when Ruloff returned, he still had the chest. He told Mrs. Anderson that he and his wife would be out of town for the next couple of weeks. He then set out with his books and manuscripts for what he called an extended trip, and he left his house in complete disarray. Now, a whole month later, and I don't understand why it took a whole month, other than I imagine because we're so used to telephones, the internet, and even, telegraph and things like that. Like things ran at a much slower pace back then. You couldn't just hop in the car and be, at a destination 30 miles away within a half an hour. It would normally take you probably a good half a day to get that far in most cases. So, but a month later, curious parties decided to enter the home, and they found evidence of an unprepared departure, which was very uncharacteristic of Harriet. The skirt she had worn on the last day anyone had seen her was laying on the floor. Still, it was another month before an investigation would be lost. And I quote, "In those days, not much was known about psychopaths or those people who broke the societal contract of their own gain without remorse. Such people made others feel vaguely uneasy and precipitated ongoing discussions among alienists about dangerousness and homicidal insanity. One even suggested that the brain contained an organ of murder." So they had a really rudimentary idea about how the brain worked. That's when you would get into like forget what they're called, but like the people that would read the bumps on your head and things like that. People without remorse, yet with their reasoning skills apparently intact, weren't exactly mentally defective as they saw it, but something humans seemed to be lacking. So they understood that it was a problem. Sorry, I got a little cat hair. But they didn't quite understand it. They for the most part still believe that if you were a murderer, you were born that way. There was no nature versus nurture. It was all about nature. You were born with this unusual part of your brain that was like the murder center of your brain. Now, Ruloff returned amid rumors. He came back amid rumors that he had killed his wife. Confronted by the Schultz, He denied any murder and claimed first that his wife had abandoned him, then that they had moved to Ohio together. Now, neither statement was believed because Harriet's clothes and personal items had been found in the house, implying that she had not left of her own accord. Now, one of Harriet's brothers, because she had several brothers, one of Harriet's brothers insisted that Ruloff take him to see her. He agreed to write her a letter, and actually, to get a little bit more in depth in this, the brothers basically told Ruloff, okay, well, if she's in Ohio, you're going to write her a letter, and you're going to stay here with us, with the family, until she answers back. Now, he did go ahead and write the letter, but just as soon as he had walked to wherever it is they go, I guess the post office or whatever, to mail off the post, as soon as he had an opportunity, he was gone. He ran. So basically, he fled a second time. But the brothers this time were not going to let this happen. And he was pursued by one of his brother-in-laws by the name of Ephraim Schultz. And he caught him several times during this run and got away several times. Like, this went on for probably a good month, where Ephraim would find him and then he would get away, and then Ephraim would find him again. But they finally did get him and bring him back. Now, a warrant was issued for his arrest. He was found and returned to Ithaca, which is that section of New York State, and locked into a cell. Now, officials not convinced of Harriet's demise issued a reward for the discovery of the bodies. The DA, however, did go ahead and prepare to prosecute Ruloff for murder. Now, Cayuga Lake was dredged in an attempt to locate the bodies, but they have never been found. As the grand jury was unwilling to indict Ruloff for murder without a body, he was instead accused of kidnapping his wife. So back then, circumstantial evidence in a murder case wasn't looked upon with the same weight that it kind of holds now, just because we have so many other ways. We have the DNA testings, we have all these other things that can help prove someone being murdered without a body. But during this time, if you didn't have a body, there was no way for them to prosecute you for a murder. In most overall, probably 99.9% of the cases. So the only way in order to get him was to basically accuse him of kidnapping. Now, Ruloff conducted his own defense at the trial, and in 1846, focusing on the lack of evidence that any crime had actually been committed. Nevertheless, he was found guilty of the kidnapping and sentenced to 10 years with hard labor at the Auburn prison. So I think that was about the maximum they could give him, was 10 years. Let's see. So where are we at right now? Because I think we're going to take a small commercial break. So hang with me for just a second. I'm a little rusty. Let's go over here and down here, and I'll see you in a minute.
Oakhurst Lunatic Asylum, case number 094. Dr. Mortimer Thornfield recording. Patient 04278, Stephen Peakety Cat. Often referring to himself as Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat. Diagnosis, Morbius Organizers Disorder, or MOD. Observation, patient exhibits an artistically delightful and disturbed mind. The patient's pursuit of selling t-shirts and merchandise that celebrate the macabre and the horrifying has led to the diagnosis of Morbius Organizers Disorder, a condition that melds artistic madness with a twisted appreciation for the darker side of cinema. Treatment plan being that the patient's products are of a perfect embodiment of their twisted artistic vision and the unique nature of the condition. Procurement of said merchandise is recommended.
And now, a word from our sponsors.
In the southeast of America, in the quiet town of Quinton, located in Walker County, Alabama, a nightmare is about to unfold. To young friends embarking on a road trip, little did they know they were about to stumble upon a horrifying tale. that would forever haunt their souls. They had no idea that their journey would lead them to the infamous Spook Trail family, deranged haunted maze makers known for their twisted ways and insatiable hunger to scare. But the question remains, will anyone make it out alive? Brace yourself, for the frights are about to begin.
Mayday! Mayday! Can you hear us? We need help. I repeat, we need help.
Oakhurst Lunatic Asylum, case number 1972. Dr. Mortimer Thornfield recording. Patients 0485993 through 0485997, known as the Psycho Bunnies. Their true identities are unknown to me at this time. Diagnosis: Eccentricus malevolentis disorder, or EMD. The patients seem to have inclinations of a twisted and unconventional artistic talents, exhibiting a disconcerting combination of insanity, disorderliness, and a penchant for the macabre. Observation: their collective behavior and unyielding commitment to selling t-shirts and merchandise that revel in the darker aspects of existence have led to the diagnosis of eccentricus malevolentis disorder, a condition that merges artistic eccentricity with a delightfully wicked sense of humor. Treatment plan: the patient's relentless obsession with creating and selling t-shirts adorned with sinister slogans, macabre imagery, and morbid humor is a defining symptom of their condition. Therefore, procurement of said merchandise is recommended.
Now, back to the show.
And we're back. Hey, Hayes, let's see what's going on in the comments real quick. Let's see. I'm so glad everybody has been so chatty. Yay, I love when you guys are having a good time in the chat. All right, let's see. Joshua, hey man, I am so glad you're here. He says, feeling attacked. Oh. And then Prometheus says, need to get a call soon and chat up like the old times. And then Purgatory Barrage says, hello, sorry I'm late. Well, you know what? You were right on time. You're right on time, and anything you missed, you can always catch us on the hashtag replay. All right, I think we are about caught up. Yes, no, maybe so. Oh, Bruce Blade Red says the commercial is so rad. Yay! I think one of them was a little loud and I couldn't figure out how to turn it down, but we'll figure it out. Let's see. Oh no, Kisa says Twitch is being a butt. Oh no, are we doing okay over there or have they kicked us off? You never know these days. You never know. All right, so let's go ahead and get back to this. So where we were, so they dredged the lake, couldn't find anything, and they would never wind up finding those bodies, unfortunately. Now, the whole time, and really before I would say he met his wife Harriet. John Edward Ruloff had always sought to be famous, but not for his deeds that eventually propelled him to it. Um, but he was born to a family in which his brother or brothers had both gone off to find their fortunes, and both of his brothers did very well. Um, I think his other brother wound up staying either in Canada or up along that area, right on the edge of the upper United States. And he wound up doing something as far as like some sort of invention to go along with the sawmills back then. So both of his brothers did very, very well. So John Ruloff had always sought to be famous. Now his like I said, his brothers did wind up to build their own fortunes. However, when they were young, he wallowed in poverty. They were very, very poor. And as he spent long hours putting together what he believed would be the most important book of humankind. Some refer to it as the method in the formation of language, which I find so funny. If you look back at some of the old like titles for books, they weren't catchy phrases. They were like, this exactly is what the book is about. They were very long and kind of just, okay, fact for fact. But basically what he was doing, he had learned many languages, and he will go on to learn more in the few years after Harriet's disappearance. But he felt that there was some sort, almost like a Rosetta Stone to human language. So, like, say in English, we call a dog, is because we've assigned that word to dog. Whereas if you go somewhere like Spain, their word for dog may be different. But his thought is that the word dog, basically we had the word before we had the thing to identify it. So therefore, I know this sounds crazy. So therefore, all languages, if translated correctly, and you had the right key to translate them, you could understand any language. Does that make sense? It was very bizarre. But that is what he thought. Now he taught himself a number of different languages, like I said, with varying degrees of facility. In order to get the origin of all thinking and communication, because he believed, like I said, that knowledge of the way language had begun offered primal information about who and what human beings fundamentally were. So he had this really, really odd idea. And basically the thought of this just winds up pretty much driving him crazy. Now he was a scholar. No one had any doubt about that. But given his long hours immersed in books, that he was a fully learned, as he presented himself, would become controversial. So to say that he wasn't a scholar or that he was a scholar, nobody really, really debates that. Even the research into this very, very odd way of thinking about language was well researched. It just it didn't have much fact to it. Now, while incarcerated for the kidnapping, Ruloff taught himself theology and formulated his own theory about language evolution that he intended to publish. And he states under the title The Great Secret in Philology after he would be released from prison. Now, he was even allowed, because at this time, I mean, they had a completely different outlook on what they considered gentlemen, scholars, people of higher learning. And he would go on to actually tutor children while he was in prison because he was considered so smart that they allowed this. However, his hopes of starting a career, allowed to teach students in his own cell. However, his hopes of starting a career in the field were dashed when he was informed that Tompkins County would charge him with the murder of his wife as soon as he was released. So basically, he was tutoring children. He was getting towards the end of his 10-year sentence, and he had planned to write this book. But certain law enforcement, as well as the family had not forgotten about what he had done. They were still wanting to try him for murder. And so basically, he was unpleasantly surprised to find out that as soon as he got out, they were going to try to charge him with her murder again. Now, Ruloff claimed double jeopardy, which in fact is somewhat true, and started a legal battle from jail. The district attorney dropped the charges for Harriet Ruloff's murder, but wound up replacing it with one for Priscilla's, because he had never been convicted or tried or anything like that in relationship to Priscilla's death. Now, Ruloff was in turn found guilty of his crime in 1858, but he escaped custody before the verdict could be reached. So he already knew that he was probably going to have to spend more time in prison. Now, no one knew where Ruloff was by this time, and by that time, he was, again, somewhere and someone else, because he was very, very well known for picking up aliases, which was very easy during that time. You just basically go to a new town and say, "Hi, my name is Joe Bob, and therefore you're Joe Bob." But now Ruloff was likely assisted with the escape from his first term prison by the son of Ithaca's undersheriff, basically the deputy's son, who was also a student of his. Now, this boy's name was Albert Jarvis, who had been tutored in Greek and Latin by Ruloff, and would later actually become his partner in crime, or some suspect by Jarvis's mother, Jane, who had also befriended Ruloff and publicly manifested her disbelief in him being a murderer. Whatever the case, however, Ruloff fled west alone and on foot. He fed on wild nuts and food stolen from farms, and actually wound up losing 2 toes due to frostbite during this time. Once reaching Meadville, Pennsylvania, he introduced himself to local inventor A.B. Richmond under the alias James Nelson, and convinced him to start a business partnership. Now, after Ruloff brandished his knowledge in the subject as a varied concholi, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that, a mineralist, forensic anthropologist, just a lot of different titles, supposedly, and skill sets he had as a very learned man. Now, Ruloff made a similar impression at Jefferson College later on. Now, it is now known as Washington and Jefferson College, and it was located in southwestern Pennsylvania, and he was about to take a professorship when Jarvis wrote him, informing him that his mother and himself were now destitute, and he even threatened Ruloff's life. Now, a lot of people believe that rather than just go ahead and take this professorship, which he was actually going to take in North Carolina, he actually decided to help Jarvis and his mother. Not because he really had any feelings for him, because he was unable really to have true feelings for anyone but himself. But they do believe it was more of a self-servant thing, as far as to protect himself. Because he did realize Jarvis had problems, and most likely in a case like this, thought that Jarvis would hold true to coming after him. So it was more about self-preservation than it was about helping Jarvis and his mother. Now, Ruloff wound up robbing a jewelry store with the intention of giving the bounty to the Jarvises, but he was arrested and sent back to Ithaca. In spite of being a murder convict, a fugitive, and a robber, Ruloff appealed his murder conviction successfully and was acquitted. and was released after authorities decided not to prosecute him for the other offenses. Now, Ruloff at this time then moved to New York City with Jarvis, where they survived as burglars. Now, in 1861, Ruloff was arrested and sentenced to serve 2.5 years in Sing Sing prison. This is where he met his second partner in crime, a gentleman by the name of William Dexter. Now, in 1869, Ruloff learned of the upcoming first convention of the American Philological Society in Poughkeepsie, New York, and sent a manuscript detailing his theory in language evolution, which he titled, like we said earlier, The Method in the Formation of Language. Now, in this case, he used the alias of Professor Uri Leroux. Now, Ruloff styled himself as a philologist. I can't even say this word. Philologists, and a new discipline which was a new discipline during his day, in which learned men studied the structure and organization of language, particularly word origins and their commonalities across different languages. He pushed himself day and night to learn Latin and Greek, looking for codes that would reveal just what language means. He compiled the method in the formation of language and offered it for sale for $500,000. Now, that wasn't today's $500,000. That was back then $500,000, believing it would make him one of the most famous and brilliant men of all time. That was the measure of his arrogance and false sense of self-worth. Now, in fact, he liked to present himself as a person whom these things came naturally and used every opportunity to let loose a phrase or literary name that would impress a new acquaintance. But there were no offers on his book, with the American Philological Association considering him a crack. Ruloff was crushed. So even though they said it was well written, he was considered a crack. Basically, it had no context. It had no basis in reality. Now, and this really did drive him mad because he had spent years and years and years on this book. Now, Ruloff, Jarvis, and Dexter their next plan was the robbery of a dry goods store in Binghamton, New York in 1870. While the two live-in clerks, Frederick Merrick and Gilbert Burroughs, slept upstairs. The trio burned chloroform in an attempt to ensure that the employees would sleep through the ordeal, but they woke when Jarvis stumbled on something, which kind of reminds me of the Mad Gasser. And in a lot of cases, they think that was just mass, panic. But it did kind of remind me of the Mad Gasser when they were talking about burning chloroform to make the people extra drowsy in the building. All right, so Merrick first attempted to shoot Ruloff with a gun that he kept under his pillow, but it failed to discharge. After that, he grabbed a stool and threw it at the fleeing Ruloff. Meanwhile, Burroughs grabbed Dexter and proceeded to beat the man. When Merrick joined Burroughs, Jarvis and Ruloff came to Dexter's rescue, and Ruloff fired a warning shot into the air. Now, Burroughs stopped, but Merrick threw himself at Jarvis. Ruloff fired a second warning shot, and then when Merrick would not desist, he pointed the gun at Merrick's head and fired, killing him instantly. So basically, like a struggle ensued, and Ruloff wound up shooting Merrick in the head. Now, in their disorderly escape, the robbers missed the boat that was to ferry them across the Chenango River and instead attempted to swim across the river. The exhausted Jarvis and Dexter were unable to keep up with the current and wound up drowning, though after Ruloff's arrest, there was some speculation, in fact, that he may have actually drowned them. Their bodies were recovered in the morning. Ruloff himself made it across, but in the struggle, he left behind a couple of leather boots, a set of boots, leather boots, with a distinctive depression where someone would be missing 2 toes. Now, alerted by Burroughs, the Binghamton police organized patrols and rounded up men that looked suspicious. Ruloff made himself a suspect the next morning when he ignored a request to identify himself at the local railroad station and ran across the train tracks to a nearby farm's outhouse, where he was captured. Ruloff identified himself first as Charles Augustus, and then later as George Williams. He was brought before the bodies of Dexter and Jarvis, which had been publicly displayed to help identify them, and he denied knowing them. And in the book, it really goes into detail how he was not fazed by them at all. He absolutely, there were no signs, because that's what a lot of the officers were looking for. Would he have a shocked or a scared reaction? And he actually had absolutely no reaction at all, just like he had never seen these people ever. However, Ruloff during this time, which is kind of karma, was himself recognized by another onlooker, a gentleman by the name of Judge Ranson Balcom, who said, "You are Edward H. Ruloff. You murdered your wife and child in Lansing in 1845. He then turned to the authorities and warned, "This man understands his rights better than you do and will defend them to the last." Documents found on Dexter and Jarvis's bodies later led investigators to a Brooklyn apartment owned by Ruloff under yet another name, Edward C. Howard. Now, Ruloff's trial began on January 4th of 1871. It became a sensation that attracted crowds of 2,000 people daily. Some, such as the director of the New York Tribune, a gentleman by the name of Horace Greeley. Now, Greeley believed that a man with the evident intellectual prowess of Ruloff was too valuable to be executed and should be spared regardless of his guilt. And if that seems shocking, this kind of thing was actually, and it may still go on, but it really kind of, this idea came back up in the early 70s. Now, of course, Greeley's idea was that Ruloff was just too smart. He was a scholar. He was too smart. He could create things later on in his life. And basically their outlook is that they, by executing him, was denying the world his knowledge, but not really knowledge of anything related to why he did what he did, or how his mind worked, or kind of the mental aspects of what was really going on with Ruloff. It was more just he was a well-educated gentleman, and therefore, because he was well-educated and he knew a lot, and he was considered an inventor and a linguist and all this other kind of stuff, that's why they should spare his life. Now, the reason I bring up the 70s is because that's kind of what mine hunters did with people such as Kemper and some of the other ones, because they believed by executing them, they wouldn't be able to study and hopefully prevent these kind of murders from happening. So it was kind of the same sort of idea in a way, but for different reasons. So it shouldn't come to a huge, shock to people. That they would sometimes spare people to be studied or whatever, regardless, rather than being executed. Now, in 1890, Philippe Pinel had introduced the label mania without delirium. And more than 2 decades later, British physician James Pritchard called it moral insanity, to indicate that one's facility for moral behavior and reasoning had been affected. He believed illness or trauma caused it, which there is some link between trauma, whether that be mental trauma or physical trauma. In 1881, German psychiatrist J.L. Koch introduced constitutional psychopathic inferiority, which covered a multitude of disorders but emphasized the loss or impairment of the power of self-government. And 4 years later, William Stead calls such people psychopaths. Someone to whom nothing is sacred is basically how he defined it. We know a little bit more about it now, but it would be another half century before psychology crystallized the disorder for practical purposes. So they struggled to make sense of someone like Ruloff. Ruloff himself, who led his own defense again, refused to plead insanity and requested that Governor John T. Hoffman either pardon him or delay his execution until his theory on language evolution was fully developed. So he still had not, even though he was crushed that the Philological Society had basically, poo-pooed him and considered him, a crack, he had not let go of it. That was crushing, but he had not let go of it. And so he claimed, though, after he finished his full development of language evolution, then he would be ready to die after that. Now, surprisingly, Mark Twain wrote a letter to the Tribune in which he satirized the request of clemency for Ruloff, stating his willingness to produce a different man that would admit to Ruloff's crime and be executed in his place. Twain also wrote, "For it is plain that in the person of Ruloff, one of the most marvelous intellects that any age has produced is about to be sacrificed, and that, too, while half the mystery of it is strange powers that is now secret, here is a man who has never entered the doors of a college or a university, and yet, by the sheer might of his innate gifts, has made himself such a connoisseur in abstruse learning that the ablest of our scholars are but pygmies in his presence. Every learned man who enters Ruloff's presence leaves it amazed and confounded by his prodigious capabilities and attainments. One scholar said he did not believe that in the matters of subtle analysis, vast knowledge in his particular field of research, comprehensive grasp of subjects, and serene kingship over its limitless and bewildered details, any land or any era of modern times had given birth to Ruloff's intellectual equal." So they really saw this man as extremely smart. Now, Twain stated in a private letter to the editor of the Tribune that he hoped to arouse public support for commuting Ruloff's sentence. New York Governor John T. Hoffman, however, rejected all appeals for clemency. 3 days before his execution date on May 18th of 1871, Ruloff reflected on his troubled life. His book was complete, though ridiculed by scholars he hoped to impress. His legacy, he feared, was cemented, and he had led a worthless life. His attorney suggested filing more appeals, but he turned those down. On the morning of his execution, in the yard of the Broome County Jail in Binghamton, he demanded of his jailer, and I quote, "You won't have any prayers nor any damned nonsense down here, will you?" His wishes were respected. The scene in Binghamton was macabre. Thousands packed the town square. Families spread out blankets along the lawn and picnicked. An escaped prisoner even stopped in Binghamton long enough to watch the execution. Now, Ruloff went to his death without any consolation of religion, which is what he wanted. He did not want any type of what he considered mumbo jumbo or anything along those lines. He went down quietly to the scaffold, declared that he had nothing to say, and then his last words were, "I can't stand still," as he had trouble keeping his balance with his arms pinioned and his head hooded. So understand, when it says pinioned, he had two front pockets in his jeans, okay, or pants or whatever. He had two pockets. And so therefore he kept his hands in his pockets, and then they placed the hood on his head. At about 11:30 on that morning, which was the morning of May 18th, 1871, the large weight, and they did it a little bit differently with him, because he was a big man. And I don't mean like, weight wise. He was truly like large bone structure, large muscular. I mean, he has the second heaviest brain on record. So he was a big man. So rather than drop him like they normally do when they hang someone, because that can have horribly dramatic outcomes. You can have the top knot kind of become detached from the rest of the body. What they did is they dropped weights that would pull up rather than him dropping down. It would pull up and break his neck that way. Which I didn't realize they did that, but in this case they did. So at about 11:30, the weights dropped to the ground, and Ruloff was jerked 3 feet in the air. He began to gasp as his hand popped out of one of his pockets. The crowd watched horrified as he tried to shove it back in his pants. His thick neck wasn't broken, only dislocated, and he was violently strangled for more than 20 minutes. This would be the last public execution in New York State. However, many thought that it was a fitting end to a life ruled by brutality. However, society was not through with Edward H. Ruloff. A death mask of plaster was made of his face, and his body was put on display for the morbid crowd that gathered at Binghamton. One local newspaper estimated that almost 6,600 people saw the corpse, and not more than 600 of these were local people. When a brother from Pennsylvania, when his brother from Pennsylvania, or one of his brothers, failed to claim his body, it was buried in a potter's field without the head. They went ahead and removed the head, buried him in potter's field, and he was dug up a couple of times because people were after that head. Now his brain was secured for the collection of Professor Bert Greenwilder of Cornell University, who declared it was the largest on record. Now, one of the things that the book also goes into is the fact that they actually had to keep the body for a lot longer than they thought, because when he went to remove the brain, the skull was almost twice as thick as a normal human skull. So it took a lot to get in there and get to it. And it took him a very, very, very long time to actually remove the head. So Ruloff was a big man. He was a big man. Now his brain, like I had said at the beginning, was secured for the collection, and it is presently on display with other brains from the Wilder collection in Uris Hall at Cornell. So Ruloff, the man designated by the New York Dispatch as the most remarkable criminal of the age, lives on in history and in legend. So, and I think you have to make an appointment now to actually go in that area. I could be mistaken, but it is a brain that you can still see. You can look it up online. It's a big old brain. They had to cut it. Like, it's not just one, like a brain. Like, they had to cut it, make it fit in the brain jar. So it was a big old brain. So let's see what's going on in the comments here, and we are about right on time. I didn't go over too much at all. And I see Calvin in the house. Hey, Calvin, how are you? And the next said, most men are after that head. Oh, is East Coast here? So East Coast, they are taking a little trip. So safe travels to you. I am so glad. Thank you so much for popping in. We are so glad to have you back. And so glad. Oh my goodness, guys. I am so excited. Spooky season. And I'm like, you know how there's just some years that you're really feeling it. And some years it's never humdrum, but you just don't feel it quite as much. Yeah, this year I'm super excited about it. Super excited. Let's see. Yes, it is. We're talking about Nadine State for the Win. Exactly. Yes, a corpse grinder neck. Yes, 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 yes. And you know, when I finally saw, because there's no pictures of him, but there are illustrations of him, because this was about the time that you had to be pretty well off in order to be able to afford like the old lithographs and things like that. A lot of people still went with the illustrations. So, and he's not what I thought he would look like. You know, I had this highwayman idea in my head about what he would look like, and he doesn't. So Eric is in the house. Eric Kramer. He said he is doing great. Was slicing a brisket while listening. Well, I hope that brisket is very, very good. I could go with some brisket right now. Let's see what else we got. And Eric says very interesting. Well, thank you. We do try to, at least I know, well, all of us do. But here in the crypt, I really, really, really dig the kind of less known stuff. So. Okay, so Nadine is saying you pronounce it Binghamton. See, that rolls off the lips a lot better, off the tongue a lot better, rather than Binghamton. Binghamton. That makes sense to me. Let's see. Yes. So Kisa said he was caught in an outhouse. Yes, which, you know, he had to have probably thought that was very belittling. It was very, very below his station to be hiding out in an outhouse. But the weird thing about it is half the time he went through life looking like a bum when he wasn't under some sort of alias or, you know, trying to pass himself off as a linguist or a professor. Most of the time he looked pretty unkept. Yes, and Akash said he was in an outhouse. Yes. All right. Well, I think I've caught up. And guys, if I've missed comments or something on those lines, I'm very sorry. You guys are just so chatty tonight, and I am so glad to be back. I hope everybody has had a fantastic summer. But I know, like most of us, we are super stoked that summer is over and spooky season has begun. It'll be a good spooky season this year, I hope. So yeah, so we're glad to be back again. This coming up Monday, Chit Chat with a Ka, and then on Thursday, You Can't Sit With Us, and then on Friday, the return of Roots Bleed Red. So don't miss those. Put those on your calendar. We'll be sending out reminders. Lots of fun stuff coming up. And in that, let me find my outro. I will wish you pleasant nightmares, guys. Bye. See you next time.
And now, folks, it's time to say goodnight. We sincerely appreciate your patronage and hope we've succeeded in bringing you an enjoyable evening of entertainment. Please drive home carefully and come back again soon. Good night.